All right, team. We are back in the Fireside PM podcast, and I have Nancy Chu on the show. First time that she's been on the Fireside PM pod. So welcome to the show, and how you doing today?
Thank you so much, Tom, for having me here today. I am excited and also nervous for this live stream.
Why is that?
Um, well, PM interview is just a topic that I talk about every day because I now do this for a living, but it's
Hmm.
different when I am being interviewed.
You're being interviewed about helping people get interviewed. Yeah,
Yes,
it's a
it's
little.
it's a different feeling, and I also love your introduction because you said, "Hi, team." I love that. We're
Yeah,
a team. Yes.
yeah. I feel like the audience here, like we're all PMs trying to build cool things and have an impact. And any way that we can trade notes and help each other out, it's good for the world.
Absolutely.
So before we get into the interview stuff, first of all, like you should feel very cool and calm in that. I go into these conversations knowing there's like rarely one right answer to anything. So it'll be fun to just get your perspective and hear about some of the things that you've observed.
Yeah.
But before we do that, why don't we just get into your background a little bit? Sort of you weren't born as a PM coach. Like what was your journey to where you are now?
I didn't consider this journey as my journey until it happened. It kind of just one thing led to another. I thought that I would stay in big tech forever. I thought I would climb that ladder. I
Mm-hmm.
thought I would become a VP one day. I thought I would be a CPO one day. I never thought that I would start a business. I never saw myself as an entrepreneur. And so now, being the owner of my own business, this is a completely unplanned thing. But
Mm.
life is kind of like that sometimes.
Yeah. What do you like most about the current gig, and what do you miss most about the badge in, badge out kind of traditional PM jobs?
What I love is the feelings of freedom and feelings of fulfillment and the feelings of emotional connection that I now feel with people that I'm working with. And it's 10x, 100x more than how I felt before.
Yeah.
That's what I love about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And what do you miss about the old jobs?
Well, the old job, let's talk about what a job is. You show up, well, first you get hired, and then you show up, and then the paycheck will just come,
Mm-hmm.
assuming you stay in the job. So that's quote unquote stability and the predictability is kind of what I miss.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just a different lifestyle now, and I lived the old lifestyle for almost 20 years in corporate America. And that's a lifestyle that is still very much embedded in my muscle memory. So now
Mm-hmm.
I'm living a very different lifestyle, but I found a way to make it kind of predictable. I have a routine. I still go to work
Mm-hmm.
and I still leave work. And so now it's not that different.
Yeah, and you were at some pretty kind of iconic places, notably Facebook.
I was there for a long
Um,
time. Yes.
yeah, I never worked there. There was definitely some cross fertilization between Google and Facebook.
Mhm.
Um, I did notice that in the last, call it 5-10 years, it was harder to have people cross back and forth. Like there were a lot of Facebook hires that were stars at Facebook, and then they come to Google, and then they wouldn't be, and then sometimes go back to Facebook, and then vice
Yeah.
versa. They're like
Yeah.
top Googlers that would just you know wouldn't work out for them
I
at
noticed that
Facebook.
too.
Yeah, what was going on there? I felt like we were drawing from similar talent pools.
Yes.
Why was there? What did you notice?
What I've noticed is what makes you successful at Meta is not necessarily going to make you successful at Google,
Mm-hmm.
and vice versa. There's a different game that you have to play because it's a different system. And Google is also a lot bigger.
Mm.
And so if you were at Meta in the earlier days, and then you go to Google thinking that it's similar, and then you'll notice that it's very different.
Yeah. How would you describe the the sort of biggest drivers of PM career success at Meta from what you observed?
Well, at Meta, so success is defined commonly by your performance evaluation.
Mhm.
That's kind of part of the culture that is very deeply ingrained and deeply embedded in how people operate. And so if your PSE or if your performance evaluation isn't like exceeding expectation, you wouldn't really feel like you have achieved success, even though HR and leadership and everyone says meets all expectation is really good because we have a
Mhm.
very high bar, but no one feels that way.
Mhm.
Well, okay, maybe not no one, never say never, but a lot of people would just continue to try to exceed every single time. And in fact, I was there for 6 years, and probably around the fourth year, I got tired of it.
Mhm.
And then I was transitioning from one team to another, and I was doing a knowledge transfer to the new PM. And I was telling the new PM, I think if you do this, the team will have meets all expectations. And then
Mhm.
the new PM comes in and they said, "Oh, but that's not good enough." And then I said, "You just wait. You will know that actually just meeting all their expectations can still feel very good."
Mm.
Yeah.
And is your impression that that desire to always exceed was different than what you noticed, let's say, with the Googlers that showed up at Meta after? Like, did you feel like they were more okay with meets?
I don't know that, but I
Mm.
know at least when I was at Meta, the performance evaluation was every 6 months. And so
Mm.
coming from Google, where the evaluation is 1 year, now at Meta, it's 1 year, but back then
Mhm.
it was every 6 months and it was very formal.
Yeah.
The vibe is very different, kind of shooting for the 6-month mark versus knowing that you have 1 year to show impact.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't it could be that the 2 companies are not maybe they're not that dissimilar, except that they're on different phases of their kind of like maturation cycle.
Yeah.
Um, what I remember from observing Meta kind of immigrants into Google
I love that.
was that they're definitely like really confident, very uh you know, fast communicators.
Hmm.
And whereas I think the Google style is a little bit more, maybe a little more laid back, a little bit less kind of um, aggressive. And I'm
I can see
curious,
that.
like, is that something that's like rewarded at Meta, where it's like, hey, you really want to know, like, this is where we're going, like we're gonna
Mhm.
do it, like this is the right call, let's do it. Versus like if you're at Google, it's like, hey, look, we could do this a few ways. Like, I think we should go this way. Let's talk about the alternatives, da da da. Or maybe that was just I'm only looking at a few data points. That might have
It
just
depends
yeah.
on where the PM is in their career and um, in the goals that they have set for themselves. If they are in the mindset of I'm going to get promoted as fast as I can, they're always trying to prove that they're already operating at the next level. And
Mm,
that is very embedded in their day-to-day behavior. So what does
mm,
operating at the next level mean? You're going to show up and you're going to direct the team. But how
yeah,
do you direct? It's not super relaxed, right?
yeah,
You're gonna show up
yeah,
at the next level.
yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. So now when you put it that way, and I think about the people I interacted with, they were directors, but they were kind of acting like VPs. And now I'm like, oh,
There
okay.
you go.
Now that you mention it, it's like, well, yeah, maybe that's what they thought they were supposed to
Yes.
do.
Yes.
Yeah, and more power to them. So let's talk about the interview process.
Mhm.
What when you got your job at
Mm.
Meta, what was that process like for you, and what do you think led to you having getting an offer?
I would say it was not a good performance per se. Um, I see interviews as performance, and that's
Hmm.
because I used to compete in piano, and so I had a lot of performances just growing up.
Hmm.
And preparing for the interview is very similar to preparing for a piano competition. You put in the time, you put in the reps, but that's not enough because there's the whole stage presence and
Mm,
then your mindset leading up to it. And then if you know that you are playing a long piece and it's going to take physical effort because energy is not infinite, you're going to run out of energy. So at the end of the performance, if the piece still requires a lot of energy where it's very loud or very fast, you actually need to prepare for the ending of the piece a lot more than the beginning.
mm,
And that's because you have to still perform with lower level of energy. And so I see that being mirrored back in the PM or just any job interview situation. If you're interviewing for a long, basically back to back to back, you actually want to put more emphasis at the end of the day. That is where you
oh,
need to be a lot better than the beginning. So looking back,
interesting.
I didn't do very well because I got down leveled.
Mm,
But the whole vibe that I I basically forgot how to compete even though I grew up as a competitive musician. How
mm,
you compete has a lot to do with how you visualize success. Like you see this when you interview athletes. They do a lot of visualization and they get their mind in a very healthy state. But my mindset at the time was not very healthy. And that's because I have failed that interview at least twice before. And so I was going in real in a very needy energy about it, as in I
yeah.
really need to pass because I failed this so many times before. I need to prove to myself
Yeah.
that I deserve to be a Facebook PM. And so
Hmm.
there was this neediness energy to it, which means I didn't get to truly shine because I was so needy about it. Versus the interview. So after Facebook, I joined Roku. The way I prepped for Roku was very, very different from the way I prepped for the Facebook interview. When I prepped for Roku, I was back in a more neutral state, as in
Hmm.
I'm going to visualize what success feels like in my body. I really believe that I could be successful in this role, and I see myself doing the job. I see myself just thriving, and that was the energy behind the Roku interview, which is completely different from the Meta interview.
Yeah, that reminds me of my early career interviews. So out of undergrad, I really wanted to work at Bain, the consulting firm. And I mean, I would dream about getting
Mhm.
that job offer and, whatever. And they interviewed on campus, and I blew the interview. Like I just was got so into my own head
Yeah.
that you get to when you're really screwed when you can hear yourself talking. And you can kind of like you're doing this outer body experience. You're not like in the moment, you're not in
Yeah.
the pocket.
Yeah.
So uh totally, like, that was one of those interviews where I knew, like, I'm not getting a call back even before the interview is over. And then years later, uh in grad school, I interviewed them, and I actually didn't even prepare because I had already decided I was going to go to Microsoft.
Mm.
And I think I might have even had the offer by then, or I just really wanted to go there. I don't didn't wasn't sure if I'd go to Bain, but I was like, oh, I'll interview with them. And because I wasn't needy and
Mhm.
I wasn't like getting into my own head about it, I was just able to be totally relaxed.
You're just being Tom.
I guess so. And the partner, at the end of the interview, he said, wow, this was the best interview of the day. I have to ask you, did somebody give you the case details? And I was like, no, no, they didn't, and it was great. And I think it goes to show you how, yes, for PM interviews or any kind of interviews, you want to have the material, you want to know the
Mhm.
frameworks and be prepared. At the same time, like, you've got to be mentally comfortable
Mhm.
and at peace and centered and
Yes.
authentic. And there is a continuum because I've seen people do the opposite too, the other end of the spectrum, where at the end of the interview, you're like, I don't think they want to work here. Like, I didn't feel any enthusiasm for this role whatsoever.
Right.
And who knows? You never know. Maybe they were like overcompensating and trying to like act like they didn't care.
Right.
But I was, you write in the review like, I don't think Google's the right place for them. They seem like they don't want to be here. So it is like that balance,
Mhm.
right? You don't want to be too needy, but you don't want to play too hard to get either.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
yes.
So for the Roku preparation, what did you do for that one? Because that one sounds like it was a much better experience. Like, how did
Mhm.
you approach it differently?
Well, I still put in a lot of time. I took
Mm,
time off from work to prepare for Roku.
mm,
So it was not something that I could do just at night or on the weekends. What did I do differently? I really took the time to understand or try to understand what delightful experiences meant because that was a team that I was interviewing for. It was a
mhm.
team that was focusing on delight. Now, that is a very foreign concept coming from Facebook. Facebook is about engagement, right? Sessions.
Mhm,
Right? So now you're starting to think about delight. It's like, what? What is that? So I spent a long time trying to just think back in the projects that I worked on and how I made it more delightful. And I
mhm,
pulled out those experiences into the presentation that I needed to give. But it was, for me, I needed to package all the different case studies into a cohesive story. Now, one of the values that I really love about Meta is the concept of shipping love. And so when I introduced myself in the beginning of the presentation, I started off by saying, I really believe in shipping love
mm,
because at the end of the day, that's what connects people. And that's what life is about. It's about connections and we're social animals. We can't live without connection. And that how do we show that through technology? Well, we have to try our best to ship love, which would then lead to this connective feeling. So I started my introduction by kind of introducing this concept of shipping love, which is a common concept at Meta, but not very common at Roku. And then I said, here's a project that I worked on. And I really picked out the pieces where I felt like this is where I showed love and this is how I did it. Even though on the surface, that product that I talked about in my presentation didn't really have high engagement. But I was able to tell a story about how love is presented in terms of technology. And then the third part of the presentation is, well, pick a product and then how would you improve it? So
mhm,
then I picked a different product. And again, I weave that topic through the second case study. Like this is how I would show love because when I think about what love means, it would lead to naturally it would lead to a more delightful experience. It would turn this experience from something that's kind of transactional and something that hooks you in to one where you actually feel delighted to use. So it for me that experience of preparing for Roku was very enjoyable for me. I really enjoy doing the take home. study.
Yeah. Well, clearly they must have felt the same way because you ended up working there.
Mhm.
You mentioned two things that I wanted to double click into. The first is that you took a little time off and you like kind of dedicated time to prepare.
Mhm.
And then the second was that part of the process involved a presentation to a group of people.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the first one. Is that your advice to job seekers? That hey, if you really want to unlock new opportunities, you can't just close your tab from your day job and then jump into an interview and wing it. Like how what's the right level of preparation that you advise PMs to do?
You might hate my answer because it's going to sound like a politician, which is it depends.
Hmm.
It depends on your energy level. It depends on whether you have the mental space at the end of the day to take on a new project. Now, for me, I'm a busy mom. I'm also the primary parent. There's no way I could have enough energy to take on a new project after work. Also, work was very draining. And so I just didn't have enough energy. But
Hmm.
let's say if I had more energy and if work wasn't that draining or if I just have a lot of space, then I wouldn't need to take time off. So it depends.
Yeah. So, okay, there could be people out there saying, "Hey, I am in a back-to-back meeting, always putting out fires, like super draining thing. That's why I'm looking for new things."
Mhm.
Um, and they may say, like, "I definitely don't have the energy to think of this as like a full-on project. I can hop on
Yeah.
a call. The full-on project, suggests a lot of research, preparation, planning." Now that's a tough situation for someone because either I guess they could take some vacation time and do that. But
Mhm.
sometimes these processes, can take place over several weeks. So it's not like,
Especially at Google.
yeah. So yeah, that's right. Famously, yeah, they could take forever.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have for people who are like, I hear you, I need the energy for the project. I'm in a job where I don't have that energy, but that's
Oh,
why I want to think about new things.
right.
Is the advice to unplug completely and, go on a gap year or what?
Oh, I love that. Wish I wish I went on a gap year. I guess I kind of did with my business. Anyway, my advice is to really think about what is important. Is staying in the current job and still continue to perform and exceed expectations and beat all the metric goals, is
Mhm.
that very, very important? Or is looking for a new project, looking for a new role more important? Because at the end of the day, we're operating on finite resources, whether it's time or energy. And so it's like an allocation exercise. How much
Mhm.
time and how much effort would you like to dedicate and allocate to all the things that are going on in your life right now? It's finite, it's not infinite.
Yeah. Yeah, I would also compare it to maybe going up for promo, and a lot of people will spend, like, weekends working,
Mhm.
on their promo packet and all the
Yeah,
artifacts and da da
yeah.
da. It's like, well, you have to surge to do it, but you could think of looking at other roles and other companies similarly.
Mhm.
Um, it's probably not something you want to do for a long time, but you have to be prepared
Yes.
to kind of put that extra energy in, and it might come at the expense of this perf period's review because you're not going to be putting 110% into the day
Right.
job,
That's right.
and that's a trade-off.
Yes, it's a trade-off.
Yeah. What do you think when you work with people now who are in that situation and they're talking to other companies and they want to
Mhm.
get ready for interviews? What do you think is like the hardest thing, in addition to carving out time and making sure they have enough like energy and bandwidth for it? What else do they struggle with that you've seen?
A lot of people struggle with fear. They struggle with this market being so bad. The numbers are against me. There are so many candidates out there. It's going to take me a long time. And they create this image of a very scary thing that may or may not happen. And so part of it is, so for me, it's very similar to preparing for a competition. What stories are you going to tell yourself that will set you up for success when you go into a competition and you have to perform? It's not going to be helpful if you continue to tell yourself that there's so many people out there, it's going to be so scary, it's going to be a long road ahead. Like all of these are very negative stories that won't really help your performance. So part of the work is recognize how our brains are wired. Our brains are wired for survival. And so when there is danger in the environment, our amygdalas kick in and then it will start to say, that's not safe. That's not safe. Like, don't go there. Stay where you are, where it is safe. But that's not necessarily the case. All starts with the stories that you tell yourself.
And given that we're now in 2024 and you alluded to the market is tougher for talent, um, can you share like what should people expect if they're like, hey, I'm in a job that I want to make a change, or maybe they're not in a job anymore and they want to look for their next job?
Mhm.
Like, how long should they expect? Like, how many conversations do they typically should they expect to have? Because I've worked with folks recently who are like, this is very weird. Like, I used to be beating off these recruiters with a stick, and now it's not like that anymore. What are you seeing out there?
Well, what I see is, okay, I'm gonna talk about my belief system, which is kind of different. So I'm
Okay.
gonna start by telling you a story. I was thinking of moving to Vegas from Bay Area not that long
Mm,
ago, about 6 months ago. I was very serious about it just because I get to live in a much nicer house in Vegas, right? And at that time, it was a very scary thought because I didn't know anyone in Vegas, didn't know anyone who moved there, didn't know anyone who was from there, just didn't know anyone. But
mhm,
after I started to consider moving to Vegas, then I started to find out that, oh, someone in my circle is from Vegas, or someone in my circle has a rental property in Vegas and they go there all the time, or someone in my circle was there and now they're here, but they're going back again in the future. And now these things started to surface itself that, oh my gosh, I do know people who are kind of connected to Vegas. I just didn't see them before.
mhm.
Now, why do you think that is?
Why do you think you started noticing these
Mhm.
connections, but you didn't see them before?
Yeah, but they have always existed in my
Yeah.
circle.
I mean, I think there is some psychological thing
Mhm.
where when your mind is interested in a certain topic, you will retain it, and
Yes.
and other times you don't. Maybe you only have so much capacity. Um, but that'd be my I don't
That's
know.
exactly it. It's the
Yeah.
self-fulfilling prophecy. So
Mhm.
once I put my focus on this thing, I will start to see it in reality. It doesn't mean that these things that I see now didn't exist before. Now,
Mhm.
what this means that when you focus on an idea, when you focus on a topic, you will see it play out in real life. And so, if you want to see something, you need to focus on it. If you focus on the thought that there's a lot of competition, that numbers are against me, that this is
Mhm.
going to take a long time, that is what you will see.
Yeah.
But if you focus on another perspective or another outcome, which is this gets to be not as scary as other people have said it to be, or this also gets to be kind of easy or easy flowing, or I'm going to have a lot of really enjoyable conversations with strangers from different companies. That's what you'll see.
And have you noticed that when your clients embrace that kind of mindset of
Mhm.
abundance and possibility, do you notice like the results are different?
Yes, because now we're starting to see evidence that
Mhm.
will support a new belief. And once you have a new belief system, it is a very positive flywheel effect. You would feel more energized to prepare for the next job interview. You would probably still get triggered once in a
Mhm.
while, but you would be able to move through the trigger a lot faster than before. So let's say if some interview result or some interviewer triggered you, and maybe the old version of you would take 2 weeks to recover from it, but this newer version of you with a different belief system probably can move through that trigger in 2 days. And then you're back to your normal self where you could really let yourself shine and thrive.
Yeah. I love it. And I think that also comes through in the interviews where, people like to be around positive
Mhm.
people. And if you're emitting this kind of desperate negative energy,
Mhm.
like it may not, that's probably going to be noticeable in some way,
Yes,
even at the subconscious level. So,
definitely.
yeah. Now, you talked about presentations,
Hmm.
and I'm curious to get your thoughts on how you advise people to prepare for those, because those presentations are not like normal presentations. It's not like an exec review presentation. It's a different type of presentation. When you're being invited to, in your case, talk about, delightful products. That's not a typical meta meeting.
It's not that different.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
I
So
actually
say more
thought it
about that.
was well, I reported into a VP who recognized me for my effort in presentations because I enjoyed storytelling, and also I was mentored and I was coached on storytelling specifically to prepare for my very first presentation for this VP. And so from that experience, I learned that, oh, storytelling really works on this guy. And so I became very serious about telling stories in every single VP presentation situation. And so it's part of my muscle memory to
Mm,
try to always tell stories. And the way this VP operates is that he doesn't really like to read a lot, especially on slides. And this was when we were in person. So it's not a
mhm,
remote situation where you're just reading the screen. So in a room, you don't want to be staring at the TV and reading a bunch of words. And so
mhm,
I learned a way to have minimal words on my slides and just have vivid imagery or uh, compelling graphs to convey a message that I wanted him to hear. And so the way I prepared for the Roku presentation to me was very, very similar to a
mm.
VP presentation.
And when you use the term storytelling, break that down for people. Like, what's the difference between a presentation done by a PM who's done a lot of homework, who has a good analysis and recommendation, versus a PM that's a really great storyteller?
A great storyteller is someone who inspires action. A very great PM who's done a lot of research is the expert in the area who may or may not be very good at inspiring action.
Mm,
And so we can answer this question by looking at what it means to inspire people. It's not
yeah.
necessarily in the data. If that's the case, everyone will be drinking a lot of water and everyone would be exercising because data shows that you should drink water and data shows that you should exercise, but not everyone does that. And so data alone does not equal inspiration.
And what would be an example that you could share where storytelling went beyond the data and really inspired action?
So I was working on this internal tool when I was at Facebook, and it was an app that helped people find out when the shuttle schedules and the pickup locations. And so if I were to inspire people by showing them data, then I would say if you don't take the shuttle, then there will be a lot of cars going to the Facebook campus, and the city of Menlo Park would fine Facebook for not controlling the number of cars on the street and creating a lot of traffic in the Menlo Park um, area, and then wear and tear on the roads. And
Hmm.
so the city would come and fine Facebook. And so we need to help the company and not drive alone. Like
Hmm.
that is a very data driven approach. I'm
Hmm.
showing you data. Look at all these cars that are coming in, and then Facebook will be fine. And that's not good. Let's be good, better citizens. But a slightly different approach is there's a technique that is called you want to see if you could treat the audience or the end users as the hero of the story that you're telling. So, hero of the story is like, Shrek is the hero of the story. There's a goal, and then he goes through struggles, and then in the middle of the story, he meets allies, and then together they beat the villain, and then he marries the princess, and happily ever after, right? So Shrek is a hero of the story. Now,
Hmm.
most of the time, people would consider themselves as the hero or the product as the hero. So the product will save money for Facebook, or the product
Hmm.
will remove the number of cars on the road. But the hero in this case should be about the end user. So how do we inspire them to take the shuttle that may or may not really work for their schedule? So we could paint a picture and say, perhaps you are a busy mom, or perhaps you have a lot of responsibilities day in and day out, and driving on this crowded road every single day would just very likely drain your energy by the time you get home, because on average the commute is probably 1 hour if you look at the entire Bay Area from North Bay to East Bay. Maybe 1 hour is
Hmm.
average commute time. Now, let's look at your energy level when you get to work, and then you have a draining work day, and then you get home. You're probably drained, and then you feel all kinds of guilt because you can't be there and be there for your kids because you're drained. And at this time, you're really questioning whether this lifestyle is what you thought it would be. And you're in this really interesting mind space where I get to work for a really great company, but I'm kind of feeling miserable on a daily basis. Like something is not adding up. But what if there is a way where it could help you preserve some of your energy? Because when you're not driving alone, you get that time back for yourself. You could use that time to check email. You could use that time to rewind. You could use that time to meditate because you're not driving alone. And that is 1 hour of commute every single day back to you, or giving time back to you. Now, most of the other apps would probably take time away from you because they want your engagement. But this is another tool where you'll actually get time back, and time is finite resource. There's nothing more precious than getting time back to do anything that you want to do. So here's another path. Do you want to try it?
I love it. Yeah, I initially in your first example, I felt like, okay, yeah, let's look at the data and we'll figure out and we'll avoid fines and there'll be these
Mhm.
ancillary benefits. I think your second approach made me much more leaned in, like let's make this happen versus like let's solve this problem.
Yeah.
um I'm guessing uh you kind of want to have a little bit of both, right?
Mhm.
If it's
Absolutely.
right, so you want to have some backup
Yes.
slides and some charts and things too.
Absolutely. Yes.
Hmm. And is that advice that you give to people for their PM interviews, so that to be a storyteller
Mhm.
also, versus just cracking the case, as it were.
Yes. Yes, and yes. So storytelling works in product sense questions, storytelling
Hmm.
works in execution questions, believe it or not. Storytelling definitely works in leadership and behavioral interviews.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the things that you demonstrated was when you can bring the audience in, and when they can kind of feel that frustration of driving an hour on the 101, or feeling
Mhm.
like you're drained by the time you get home and wanting to have more agency, um, it just hits a little different
It's
than
different.
like, oh, here's our expected number of cars on the road, and at this
Yes.
rate we'll be out of parking spaces, whatever, which is also
Yes.
true.
It's also true,
um,
yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. This is great. I know we're a little over time, but I want to just ask you a couple of final questions, and then also get a sense from you, like how people can hear more from you, and where they can learn more about what you do. But maybe my last question on the topic of interviews is, if you were talking to someone who said, "Hey, um, I haven't interviewed for a few years,
Hmm.
and now, but I've been a great PM, and I've gotten
Mhm.
great reviews. I was promoted, like I'm a top performer. So I'm going to start interviewing in the next few weeks." What kind of high level advice would you give someone like that?
Allocate more time.
Mm,
It's the same thing as preparing for competition.
yeah,
Yes, you've been doing the reps. Yes, you've been doing the actual work. Yes, you have craft. All of that is really good. But to prepare for competition is a slightly different exercise that you have to do. And so
yeah,
let's not try to wing it. Let's try to actually win.
yeah, yeah. I think that makes a ton of sense, and I think part of it is because the skill of performing well in the PM interview and recruiting process is related to, but different than
Hmm.
the skill of launching and landing features that have big impact.
Hmm.
And it might be that you are doing the latter great.
Hmm.
It does not mean that you can walk in and do the former as good. In fact, most likely you'll have to bring out some muscles that you haven't used in a while.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, and you definitely will need some reps, because your first few will probably not go
Hmm.
as well as your last, as your third or fourth. Um,
Yeah. So in a piano competition setting, just knowing how to play the piece is not 100% of the prep. Part of the
mm,
prep is, how do you know how to walk on stage?
mm,
Like, where are you going to walk? And where are you going to bow? And how far is the walk from the end of the stage to the piano? And then what happens if your hands get sweaty in the middle of your performance? Like, there's all these things that are not really applicable when you're just practicing how to play the instrument. There's the performance aspect of it that is an add on. And an interview is a performance. And so, how do you show up the best you can? How do you show a screen and go through a case study and think and type at the same time? Like, you don't really do that on a day to day. But
yeah,
interview is different. It requires a different set of muscles, like you said, that's not typically used on a day to day. So we have to exercise those muscles.
100%. Well, Nancy, how can people get more advice and learn more about you and benefit more from your observations and insights?
Thank you for asking the question.
Yeah.
You can find me on LinkedIn/Nancy True. I host monthly community roundtables to help out the community, and they're free and open to anyone who wants to prepare for PM interviews. The next one is next week, right? 28th. Yeah, next week. So that will be the I would say the next opportunity to come and meet other people in the community if you're up for it.
Love it. And where can they sign up? How do they find out about the community events?
Follow me on LinkedIn and I will create
Mhm.
a post.
Sounds great. Wonderful. Anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
I want to say at the end of the day, the interview is a conversation. It's not it's nothing more than a conversation. And there's two types of conversations. Either the type that wants you that makes you want to have more conversations, or the type where you kind of just want to stop talking to the person. And so that is the mindset we should have going into an interview setting. How do you have a great conversation with someone? You're meeting another human being. So it's not a robot that you're meeting, right? It's also not necessarily a judge that you are like kneeling down in front of. It's just a conversation, and the goal that we could set for an interview is to make sure that this conversation goes well so that you'll want to have another conversation and eventually it would lead to a job offer. But let's prepare our nervous system and let's not create stories that are bigger than what it actually is. At the end of the day, it is a conversation, and think about how to connect with another human being such that they'll want to have another conversation next week.
Love it. That's great advice, Nancy. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to let you go and then I'll share some closing thoughts and then we'll wrap up this stream, but it's been great having you on.
You're great. Thank you so much and take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Nancy Chu, follow her on LinkedIn. Always thought provoking. I had the pleasure of being on her show previously, and it's always fun trading notes. It's also interesting because Google and Facebook, they've always been kind of these cousins, and I always like trading notes and understanding, like, well, what was it like over there? um, some thoughts for you all from my perspective on interviews. So the first one is I think I will absolutely plus one this notion of think of it as a conversation. Think of it as an opportunity to talk about stuff that you're really excited about. And the more relaxed and authentic you can be, the better. I've definitely interviewed people where they're kind of saying all the right things, but we're just not connecting because they're like, oh, give me a question. Let me solve this puzzle for you. And those are the folks that I think often will get the leading higher rating, which is like, they're great. But the ones that'll get the higher or the strong higher are the ones where they do all of that and you feel the connection and you feel like we're having a conversation and you feel like the person's like really present and they're not like in their head going through their 5-point checklist on how to answer this typical product review question or product interview question. So definitely plus one on the conversation part. I think the second thing is the biggest misconception I've seen is people don't carve out enough time and bandwidth, which I think Nancy rightfully pointed out at the beginning of our dialogue, where it's think of it as like I don't know if it's a second job, but it's like putting together a promo packet, going up for promo, or launching a big product. Like it's gonna take evening and weekend hours, and it probably will come at the expense of other things. And in this market, you're gonna have to be ready to do it for easily many months, maybe many quarters. It's August. They're going to cut rates hopefully in a year, not a year, at the end of this year. So maybe the economy will come back in a bigger way, but it's going to take a while to absorb a lot of the talent that's in the market right now. There's also like the potential little bit of a reckoning for all of the AI kind of seed funded companies that need to really show some revenue now and may not have as much Series A kind of activity given the number of seed companies that are floating around. So that means there's going to be more talent in the market. So just be ready, be ready to kind of put some time in. I was coaching someone earlier this week and they're like, "Oh, I'm kind of 8 out of 10 in my current role. Like I'm pretty happy, but I do know I want to make a change." And so I told them like, it could take 6 to 12 months. Even though you're happy and you don't need to make a big change, so you're not going to be super desperate. But there's just a lot of great people in the market. And if you're a hiring manager, you can kind of name your requirements and there's someone out there that meets them. So that's point 2, carve out the time. And maybe point 3, in terms of the actual PM interviews, I would say the biggest difference when I'm actually doing an interview and someone's like, oh, Nancy say, "Hey, didn't know you stay on there." I don't do it all the time, Nancy, but I do it like half the time. Part of it, I feel bad making the guests sit through me kind of pontificating, since the primary point of the interview is for the guest to talk. So this is just kind of my wrap up, like kind of the after show takeaway. So the third one is be ready for the follow-up questions. So people are usually really good about, "Oh, well, let me tell you about a time I did this and blah, blah." And then I'll be like, "Okay, what was like a really hard decision you had to make in that launch or whatever, or that product?" And then they'll say, "Well, it was this." And then I'll want to go a little deeper and I say, "Okay, now tell me about the alternatives that you thought about. I would have thought you would have gone in this other direction." And the great interviewees, like, they've lived that project and they know exactly what all the pros and cons are around these alternatives, and they'll be able to speak to it. And the okay interviewees, you kind of see like, oh no, they kind of have their 5 bullet points, but they can't go into the 3 sub bullets per 5. And that's a pain because you're like, "What? I got to have 15 sub bullets ready?" It's like, yeah, you kind of do. And it's unlikely that all of them will come up, but probably 1 or 2 will. And you want to be ready. And then that kind of reinforces the point about the need to kind of prepare, because it takes time. So those are my closing thoughts. I have a lightning webinar on Maven scheduled for September 6th. I think it's the 6th. Yeah. And it's going to be about AI product strategy. And we're going to break down a HBS case around a major bank that implemented a bunch of Gen AI end of 23, early 24 around personalization and improved customer experience. And then they also implemented some AI around back office kind of efficiency. And we're going to look into it together to figure out like, okay, what are the trade-offs that are being made here? What are the risks that are being contemplated? How does this fit into the bank's longer term strategy? What's the internal organizational approach to incubating these kinds of things? So I am a huge fan of the case method and getting into specific examples that we can kind of unpack together. So if that's of interest to you, you can sign up on, oh shoot, I should probably, it's on, my main class is on maven.com/Tom L, which is there. And then the lightning, I'll put it in a link in the description below. And then you can just follow me on LinkedIn. I think I already posted something on LinkedIn about it as well. So check it out if you're interested. And then if you need any one-on-one coaching, or lately I've been doing a bunch of team coaching, which has been fun, where I'm working with like a whole group of people in the same company. Hit me up and we can talk more about it. But in the meantime, have a great rest of your week and hopefully have an amazing weekend. And after that, let's get back to work. See ya.